what I'm picking up from our work, which I'll mention briefly, and what I hear here today, is that there is actually a potential real transformation going on at all levels of the system, and nobody knows how to do it. That's and so that this is exciting but daunting, but also we work practically, as I hope you do, and so I want to start with that. We when I say we, there's about I think about 8 of us we mix and match on projects. Andy Hargraves and myself at the policy level. We have Joanne Quinn, who's a co-author of Coherence that I'll come back to, capacity builder, great chief researcher who just recently graduated with Richard Elmore, Santiago Rincon Gallardo. And then we have a great, I don't know what they call it, incestuous relationship with the Ministry of Education in Ontario, but because I've been advisor since 2003, when we started this initiative, we help get good people into the ministry, deputy minister, teams, etc. And then we work with them. And then when they want to retire early, they come and work with us, right? And that's Mary Jean Gallagher is doing that now at the end of October, and she's been head of the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat. So we're spawning these people who are doing the work. And so I want to say about the work, it's whole system change, which means the minimum size is the province or the state or the country. And it's about actually doing things that are amenable to specificity and to causal pathways to impact. And that's the nature of the work, and it happens quickly. And I do write a lot, but the method I use for writing is, and this is a slight exaggeration, although not this month, is that I like to write today what happened yesterday. That is, the new stuff we're doing now is coming out because it's coming out from practitioners, a mile-a-minute videos as well as that. And we can get in there, and because we're helping them anyways, and pull this out and render it rather rapidly. So this is kind of rapid things coming to the fore. On the whole system work, we still work in Ontario a lot. We've had now 2 premiers, same party. So that's been some degree of continuity with some bumpiness on the union side, but it's more or less settled down except for one piece of it. But we have been able, there's 4,000 elementary schools in Ontario, 900 high schools, 72 districts, all in the public system, which includes the Catholic system, publicly funded. And we have since 2003, following the evaluation of the literacy and numeracy strategy, where a team of us in 98 to 2002 did that evaluation in England, and we drew a couple of lessons of what not to do. Thank you very much, it wasn't your fault. And what to do. The 2 not to do was focus on negative accountability, which you still do, and the other one was obsess on targets. And what to do, though, was focus. And the first system, actually, the second one, to invest really seriously in capacity building. So nobody had done on a system level capacity building that you invested in. So we took those in Ontario, and Santiago and I wrote, I think, quite a good chapter on the Ontario story, so you can get that from us. It's on from 2003 to 2015, and we wrote it as a strategy chapter. That is, not only what was done, what were the components, but what were the strategic decisions as we go along. And when I think of Marjorie at Eitzel, and just to use this as an illustration, in order to get system change and leadership, what we did was 2 things in this order. We invested in learning is the work. So this was what do principal school leaders have to do to be successful? And I'll come back to that in a moment. And then getting that day-to-day work embedded, talk about culture and policy. We actually focused on culture, in other words. Change the culture, the learning is the work. And then we wrapped it around with a leadership framework, which standards, if you like, which were reinforcers but not causes. And in fact, I don't think even though everybody uses it, I don't think we made it mandatory, but this is how I like the change process, is that you work and you identify really good things, and you don't have to mandate them because they become inevitably embedded. You don't have to mandate them if you do it right, in the co-owning of that. So this has been, you can look at Ontario and see that part of it I'll come back to it around NPDL. So we continue to work in Ontario as a system. California, where they're massively big system, 42 million people, 1,009 districts. Everybody is behind the right drivers, which when Tony commissioned that paper from me on what are the wrong drivers. Remember, the wrong drivers were negative accountability, individualism, technology, and ad hoc policies. The right drivers in that first formulation was capacity building, teamwork, pedagogy, and coordinated policy. So California, we're working there. Tremendous problem because they don't have the capacity, but they have the interest and the motivation to want to change the system. The governor, state superintendent, elected differently, also elected from the public, I should say. 1,009 districts, administrative associations. So we're teaming up with quite a few people to do good work there, and it's coming out. But anyway, I'm saying it that way because we're immersed in the real action. And then New Zealand, where Tony is now deputy head of the council on teachers and leaders. Great example as well. I'm going to underline this in a moment. But about 2 years ago, when New Zealand came out with the IES policy, Investing in Education Success, it more or less went, we had a lot of years of autonomy, the government sort of said, but now there's too much of a gap between high and low performers, especially the disadvantaged, and therefore we need to have more focus and more kind of coming in. And so they proposed, without any consultation, that every school would be in a network of, say, they said, on the average 10 schools, and it would be headed by an executive principal. It's like the academies, except forced. And so that happened about a year and a half ago, and I was there on that time in New Zealand. And then I took on the task, and this is, I want to give the nature of this work, is my task was to work with the ministry to help implement this policy of all schools being networked in communities of learners, and then to work with the unions and the principals to help the policy from being implemented, to prevent it from being implemented. So that was the task. And they didn't get partnership, they invested, but then they doubled back and they started to do that. Just yesterday, I think, that they announced the outcome of the elementary school teachers and principals in one group were dead against the policy. They said they wouldn't participate, nobody's going to do it. They then did a joint initiative over 6 months, came out with a 3-pager that has all the great values in it, and now they've come up with a mechanism to implement it. So I'm saying that because this is happening right and left, and we have one concept that I wanted to introduce or say here is we call it leadership from the middle. Andy Hargreaves picked it up from a study he did of districts in Ontario working together to cause some change. Leadership from the middle is based on the logic that, and really the evidence, I would say, that change from the top-down change you can never get right for reasons that Rod actually said very well. So you can never get it right from the top, but if you go to school autonomy, it's just a bunch of ad hoc possibilities, hit or miss, and they don't coalesce. So that doesn't work either. So the middle, in the case of North America, usually the middle are districts and schools. In the case of New Zealand, they would be schools. Here, they would be schools as well. Maybe in the Catholic districts, it could be combinations that tied in with the district. But leadership from the middle is a powerful concept. And we want to build up the coherence, the capacity, and the influence of the middle. And I actually do say this in most cases, we want the center, that is the government, not to run the strategy, but to like it. That makes sense. We want them to like the strategy, but not to run it. So in some cases, you wouldn't want them to even like it. But the point is, there's a lot of activity coming from the middle of doing that. And both Andy and I did a paper for different publications on leadership from the middle, and he's presenting at ACEL on Friday his work. So. And then if we take California, just to pinpoint how difficult this is going to be, and I'm going to get even more radical about the difficulty just in a few minutes, is that the governor, who's Jerry Brown, in California, loves the law of subsidiarity. So he passed a policy which decentralized the resources and the authority to the school level under a local control funding formula. It's called LCFF. and the mechanism is LCAP, Local Control Accountability Program. So 1,009 districts then had to produce local plans, and you could see that they got money, more than they have for the last 20 years, and authority to do it, but didn't have the capacity necessarily. And I do, one of the foundations funds me to do a running commentary on California, on what's happening in the evolution. And if you go to my website, which is michaelfullan.ca, there's a California corner. And I did 3 of those. The last one I did was on LCAP. And I checked this also without, I mean, there's a lot of ins and outs that you have to do this in a good political way. But basically I said LCAP is a massive failure because people have unwittingly treated it as a compliance exercise. And they're producing these plans that are 50, 70 pages long. And the plan becomes in itself stuff we already knew, but that's their first experience. So I just say this, and I really want to zero in on the substance of what you're talking about. On the transformation here, and we have, in the coherence book, Joanne and I took, this is coming from our workshops really, took the experience of the right and wrong drivers. The subtitle of the book is Putting the Right Drivers in Action. And we have 4 pieces with leadership drilling down to kind of coalesce them. The 4 pieces are focusing direction, 4 quadrants if you like. Second one is collaboration to get there. The third one is deep learning. And the fourth is securing accountability. So I'm not going to build on this. You can look at what we've done. It really does come from the practice. I think it covers a lot of the things that we're talking about. And it occurred to me when I was listening today, one of the things that we're learning that I'd like to just tweak what you said, South Australia said this, I think Rod said it, is that there's a growing partnership among the center, if you like, and the decenter, or whatever the rest of the combination is, a growing partnership to co-determine the direction. And people are really getting together on that. I'm going to say that that's a fabulous first step. But the real step, and I want to change the word, is when you start to put it into practice, the word is co-learning, not partnership. Because what's happening is there's a tremendous amount of co-learning that has to happen for this to be successful. And that we begin to see this unfold in a good way. On accountability, we've taken Richard Elmore's observation about 12 years ago where he said no amount of external accountability will be effective in the absence of internal accountability. So internal accountability is when the group is responsible to itself. You have to have a group, you have to be transparent, you have to have actual specificity to measures for it to be accountable, and then you build that up, which is really our fourth of our quadrants, securing accountability. You secure accountability by building professional accountability, and then reinforcing it with selective external accountability. Selective in the sense of what are the disadvantages, where do we have to intervene, where it's not working. But the main center of gravity is the internal accountability of the groups, which brings us to what that internal accountability looks like, and it was said several ways here. Basically, it is changing the teacher's role in terms of the collaboration so that there's a huge increase in the amount of purposeful collaboration in small groups that's transparent, that's well-led, that deals with the agenda we're talking about. I haven't radicalized the agenda yet, but just that part. And we've got at least 3 confirmations of that recently. And you know this, but I want to give remind you about it. John Hattie's, when he was doing his meta-studies and publishing all that work, we kept saying to him, well, all of this about the effect sizes are about individual teachers doing individual instruction, not individualized instruction, but instructional practices. But we happen to know that the group is very strong. So you saw his paper recently, the second paper of the 2. He calls it collaborative expertise, I think. Collaborative expertise is a very specific phenomenon. It is one that has specificity to it. It's working on actual changes in the learning, and it's tied into outcomes. So that's important to know. I just talked to Richard Elmore a couple of days ago, and he's been, if we follow him personally or close enough personally, you'll know he kind of dropped out of the picture because he just almost gave up on the public system and that. But he's been working with a number of school districts recently, the last 3 years, and his concept is collective efficacy. It's the same thing, and he says it this strongly, that they're finding that the effect size of a collective efficacy is equal to SES. Equal in those districts that are inputting it. In other words, it's as powerful as family background. You have to do both. You want to do both. So this, and then our own professional capital, which has the human, social, and decisional capital, which is the evidence-based culture, is the same thing. We have developed in the last year and tested and validated an instrument to assess capital. And that those 3 dimensions, there's 15 items for each one for teachers, one for principal. I don't think instruments actually are causal, but they actually can be helpful along the way. So this building up of the professional capital, collaborative capital of teachers working together, obviously it relates to leadership from the middle because they're working together. And we were talking about variation, you know, the consistent OECD findings that variation within schools is often greater than variation between schools, although here I think it's equally strong both in Australia. The point is you have to reduce variation of ineffectiveness, or to put it our way, good collaboration reduces bad variation. Bad variation is ineffective teaching. Good collaboration makes it more consistent and more focused. So we're sort of leading up to the main point I wanted to say, which is that we do have a big project now that's evolved in the last 24 months. And it evolved partly when I wrote a book called Stratosphere 2 years ago, where I said there's 3 forces that are not connected, but they're happening and they're bound to connect. We better make them connect in a useful way. Those 3 forces were pedagogy, technology, and change knowledge. So if you don't have those 3, and then the foundation for that in some sense is this: traditional schooling is boring for students as they go up the grade levels. Evidence is very clear. One of our principals, when we were filming in school, said, well, actually, it's boring for teachers as well. It's just they didn't realize it until they started to change. So I'm going to say to you that in our NPDL work, which is right now, it is based on a model that has 10 clusters of approximately 100 schools in 10 different countries. We've got 7, we've got about 700. In Australia, there's 80 from Melbourne area and 20 from Tasmania. And we've been working these last, in the stratosphere, I noticed this stuff bubbling up spontaneously without any help from good innovative people that were doing it. Now we're seeing it take off like wildfire because we've enabled it with a couple of things. And there's 2 or 3 things I want to say about it, and then I'll stop. One is that the dependent variable, if I put it that way, the outcomes is changing. So PISA scores, NAPLAN scores are no longer the most important. You know that. But I'm saying the shift, and our shift is towards what we call the 6 C's. And the 6 C's are our character education, citizenship, collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. And so we have rubrics to measure these. When Rod showed the educated citizen of BC 12 years ago, that was something like the 6 C's, except it wasn't specified. It wasn't operationalized. So I'm going to say things like the 6 C's are replacing the measures we're talking about. Everybody has said that for almost 20 years, but nobody's done it until now I see the transformation happening. So big thing in mobilizing that. If you're going to mobilize the 6 C's or some variation, then you have to also change the nature of pedagogy. And the nature of pedagogy, this means radical changes in the learning partnership between and among students, teachers, and families. And that's a big change, transformational change. And even the best examples, and we're seeing really good examples, they're quite often they're on video. Even the best examples, the teacher is still too much in control. Or if I flip out of another side, when you get to this really openness with students, you get into a kind of situation where teachers kind of are at sea. There's no longer It doesn't look like there's a role for the teacher if you go open it up to students, but there's a tremendously critical role of pulling this together. And now take it to, also on the measures while we're talking about that. We're just forming a partnership with, on this work with OECD, with Andreas. And you might know that they have a project called Project 2030, which is now about a year old, and they're assessing the learning outcomes. They call them the global competencies, but they're like the 6 C's. So here's PISA shifting away into the new and better measures. Then you have to say, well, if these are the better measures, what are the learning conditions that's going to produce those measures? Learning conditions at the school level, across school, at the policy level. So this is big, really big transformational things in doing it. Finally, we're just teasing that out, and I go back to my rapid research. This is how, it's moving so fast, this is how we have to do it in a sense. We're just kind of pulling together for a big event in October 13th in Seattle, what we're learning so far. And so I asked Santiago, who's a fantastic research guy, we said, let's select 3 school districts in Ontario. There's 12 of them in PDL that are on the move, 12 of the 72. And select the 3 that are really going, and take the team of 3 people out and only spend 1 day in each place. I mean, do background work, 1 day in each place during September. And at the end of that 1 day, within 24 hours, give me a 2-pager on what you've learned about the following questions. And there's only about 10 questions. And then after you've done the 3, do a cross-case analysis and do that in 2 or 3 pages. We do this rapidly. And the people that are doing it are so good because they're immersed in it. And this is a fast-paced phenomenon. And about innovation, I guess I want to say, innovation has to be permanent because in the new paradigm, learning is permanent. You can't have permanent learning and not have permanent innovation. So those 2 things go together. 2 things we're discovering, and I'm just pulling out the lessons from these 3 cases. I just got the last one this morning, actually. One is that the role of tools. We have rubrics and protocols to assess the 6 C's, the pedagogical partnership, the school conditions, the cluster conditions, which are the interaction of schools, and then the policy level. And this is what people are telling us consistently, actually, that the tools were a fantastic intervention because the schools that were doing this were at sea to figure out how to make shape of it. They didn't know how to organize it. It was all new. So and I love the way that one of our district leaders said it this way, one who's very active. He said that what the tools did is they gave us the means of focusing and shaping this without suffocating context. That was his phrase, without suffocating context. In other words, it wasn't constraining. And we're also funded by the Hewlett Foundation, and Barbara Hewlett, Barbara Chow, who works for Hewlett, who has been investing in all kinds of these tools. She said, tell me something about how can I think of, how do tools travel well? And I know you're working on a set of tools that for schools and you have adapted here, but the question of how tools, what is the role of tools? How can they actually enable focus without constraining? How can they really travel well against different circumstances? And this is one of the things we're finding. On leadership, and I think this is a new role for leaders, both at the district level in our case and at the school level, is that in one of the papers we did for Pearson, it's called a rich seam. The change model is roughly this. It was too crude, but now we're more specific. The crude model was directional vision, so not too constrained. Letting go, again, you try a lot of things, and reining in. It's not quite that, it's more cyclical and interactive. And now when we operationalize that, what we see in these schools is that the leaders who are, the one I'm thinking about now, his role as superintendent with his principals, he said, is I go in and in one of the books we did, we said, big thing about the role of school leaders, participate as a learner. Come from Vivian Robinson's research. Participate as a learner. What participate as a learner means is you're in there, you're saying, listening and observing and asking a lot of questions. And the interesting thing about participating as a learner, you actually learn something. So if you do that, you get better at it. And then you start to provide more shape to it. You've learned and you continue and you provide shape to others. So I think the leadership role, which is, to me, it's participating as a learner. So you can get very good at it and you can produce other learners. And if I think of the success of any leader, school leader, any organization actually, it's to do all the right things for 5 or 6 years to the point where you become dispensable. That's your success marker. When you become dispensable to the organization, you've done well. Because if you're never dispensable, you're always going to leave at the wrong time. And if you're dispensable, it means you helped others develop. So I think the notion of shaping this, the leader of doing that. So we've got the leader as learner. And then the last point I want to make, because it came up and it's so important for us, we use the word and have used the word for quite a few years of systemness, that the role of a leader, the role of a teacher for that matter, is to be a system player. And what a system player means is you do your work in your own kind of focused way, and at the same time, you think of it as your responsibility to contribute to the slightly or bigger system and to learn from the bigger system. So very, very easy on it on the school level. When a principal or when a school becomes collaborative, we know this, that individual teachers stop thinking about my classroom only and start thinking about all kids in the whole school. When Tower Hamlet's principals in that, when they start thinking about my school, they're thinking about the success of the system, which are really other schools. They don't want to please the director necessarily. They want to support other schools and have it build up. So that systemness is a concrete thing of co-learning. And the word that we are seeing that I just described in all of this is co-learning. The leadership role, co-learning with the teachers, with students, with parents, there's a whole bunch of things. People do not have the capacity. One of the points that Richard mentioned the other day was, he said, in the work we're doing, the teachers in the US at least, don't even come close to having the capacity to be able to do this individually or together. So we've got a massive, he called it a human capital problem, we call it a professional capital problem, to build up the profession so it would be this good, that good, to be able to relate to leaders, other leaders better, and to be able to relate to teachers and students, other teachers and students. Because the goal at the end of the day is to work with a system where the people in that system learn to be in charge of their own learning. That's the goal. If you can't end up with a group who's learned to be in charge of their own learning, you haven't been successful. So I'm going to just stop there. I know I've covered quite a few things, but these are all kind of bubbling around that. We don't have the language for it yet, all of it, but we're working on it. You're working on it, and I think this next 12 months could be dynamite for pulling this together and getting initial glimpses that we didn't have before. Okay, thank you.